man nicht.
Stadt von Geist und
Oh, good.
Vilne jiddischlich vertracht, wo es murmeln stille Tfilas, stille sei des von der Nacht. Oftmals seh ich dir in Chalem, es geliebte Vilner mein, und die alte Vilner Ghetto in an nebeldigen Schein. Vilne, Vilne, unser Heimstadt, unser Bänkschaft unbegehr. Ach, wie oft es ruft dein Namen von mein Eugereus Atren. Wilner Gesslich, Wilner Teichen, Wilner Wälder Balg und Tor. Etwas Neues, etwas bringt sich nach den Zeiten von Amor.
Teure Liebhaber von Yiddish und jiddischer Poesie. My name is Kolya Baradulin, and I'm the director of Yiddish programming at the Workers' Circle Arbeiterin. A hartstikke Dank voor het komen. Using this appropriate opportunity, I would like to invite you to our two very important and meaningful events. On January 27 at 1 p.m., on Holocaust Remembrance Day, we have a very special presentation of Hirsch Moller's book, Eden on Galilates, Jews Without Yellow Stars, Yiddish Stories of Jewish Partisan Fighters in Nazi-occupied Belarus, translated by Ruth Murphy, a professional interpreter and a student of our Yiddish program. A distinguished scholar, Gennady Eystrich, and the book editor, Catherine Matzen, will take part in the discussion. Ruth selected 4 stories from the book, which will be read in Yiddish by our young, advanced Yiddish students, one of whom lives in Minsk. The English translation will be provided on the screen. On February 1, we have our annual program, Winter in Yiddishland, a full-day program of Yiddish classes and klezmer workshop for all levels and ages, starting at 9:30 a.m. Eastern Time with Yiddish yoga and finishing at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time with Yiddish sing-along. We invite you to spend the day with Yiddish and Yiddish culture, meet your friends, and become friends with Yiddish fans around the world. Today's presentation is very special and dear to me. I was teaching an advanced Yiddish literature course about Sholem Asch novel Motka Ganev, Motka the Thief, in the fall of 2024. Before the class started, I noticed that 2 students registered on the same day for this course. Dan Apatoshu, a grandson of distinguished Yiddish writer Joseph Apatoshu, and Anna Miransky, a daughter of important Yiddish poet Peretz Miransky, a member of a legendary literary group, Yung-Vilne. Azat Zufall. What a coincidence. Then I was looking for an image of Peretz Miransky. I came across an amazing picture. You see Apatoshu and Miransky. And we can also see Anna Miransky and Dan Apatoshu. Be'emes, really, from door to door. After the semester was finished, Anna, or Hannah, this is how I call her in class, told me that she has to take a time off because she was planning to write a book about her father. Last fall, I received very excited news from Hannah. Her book, poem by poem, fable by fable, Discovering My Father and Learning His Language, has won the 2025 Canadian Jewish Literary Award at the category of Yiddish. Aza wunderliche Neues. I felt asach naches, truly. It's so great when one of your students achieves an incredible recognition. I'm so happy for Hannah, and I'm so grateful that she agreed to make a special presentation at our Yiddish program at the Workers' Circle. I'm also very thankful to my dear Lehrerin, my teacher, Sheva Zucker, who graciously agreed to read selected Peretz Miransky poems in Yiddish. During the presentation, you can write your questions in chat or Q&A, and we will dedicate some time to answering them. It's my great pleasure to introduce Anna Miransky.
I'd like to first express my thanks to the Worker Circle for offering this event, and to Kolya, Sheva in particular, and Natalia, Baruch, for the time, effort, and feeling you put into this. And also to all of you who are here, people I might have met in classes at the Worker Circle, students of Yiddish and Yiddish culture, and my friends and family. I was lucky in that I was given a very interesting subject for my book and the raw materials for it by my father, Peretz Miransky. I'd like to give you a little bit of background about him before I begin to speak about the book I wrote. My father was a Yiddish poet and fabulist, a member of Yung-Vilne, the last important Yiddish literary group in Eastern Europe. He was born in Vilna and lived mostly in a suburb called Schnippeschock, very close to the toll gate that separated the city from the countryside, surrounded by nature. He lived in Vilna until he fled the Nazis when he was 33. He survived the Holocaust in Samarkand in the Soviet Union, and after escaping the Soviet Union with my mother, whom he met and married there, he and my mother arrived at the Tempelhof DP camp where my sister Libby was born. This was followed by a year in Paris awaiting documents. Our family then landed in Montreal in 1949, where my brother Rami was born a few years later. I was born on the ocean voyage across. Peretz was Yung-Vilne's youngest member, only 28 when he was invited to join the group. All the members of Yung-Vilne were invited because of something innovative or unique in their writing. My father was invited on the strength of his fables. In Montreal, he reconstructed from memory the poetry and fables he had written before and during the war, and these were published in Montreal as a book called A Licht für a Groschen, A Candle for a Penny, in 1951. He didn't publish his next book until 23 years later, a few years after my mother died. In all, Peretz wrote 5 substantial volumes of poetry and fables, the last one published in 1991, 2 years before his own death. For years, these books were lined up on a bookshelf in my living room, mostly unread by me. During the COVID isolation period, I had begun to study Yiddish here at the Worker Circle, and things started to percolate inside my brain. Yiddish words and phrases began to return to me. I had dreams in which I spoke Yiddish, and long-forgotten memories that had taken place in Yiddish came back to me. Then, coincidentally, I was contacted by Ida Schiff, a Yiddish language activist in Toronto, on behalf of a Yiddish educator, Hannah Berman, who was looking for one of my father's poems and asked if I could locate it for her. I looked through all his books and couldn't find it. It was a poem that had been published elsewhere. But in the process of looking through the 5 books, I realized I knew very little of these poems and fables and decided on the spot, as a project, simply to read one a day. I quickly became fascinated by what I was reading and started to make notes, but the idea of writing a book didn't arrive in earnest until many months later. As I began to read and reflect on what I was reading, I soon realized I needed consultation with my friend and Yiddish scholar David Roskies, whom I first knew in Montreal when we were children in the same class in the Volksschule, to help me understand particular words and customs. We set up regular Zoom meetings, which led to conversations about Peretz's place in the Yiddish literary canon and his literary influences, which eventually also found their way into the book. I also needed a lot of help from the massive, comprehensive Yiddish-English dictionary by Beinfeld and Buckner at my elbow every afternoon as I was reading one poem at a time. For most of my adult life, I sparred with my father and judged him as self-involved and lacking interest in being a father. From a narrow perspective, those were not inaccurate labels. But I did not know Peretz well, in part because he was silent about and preoccupied with his pre-war life and massive losses, in large part because his language of communication, the language of his soul, was Yiddish and would remain so until the day he died. My father never became comfortable in English, although he appreciated it as a rich language and even tried to translate his own poetry into English. My first language was Yiddish, but I lost the ability to speak it around the age of 7 when I entered public school. And so throughout my father's life, ours was an imperfect communication. Him speaking to me in Yiddish, in which I had only a child's vocabulary and understanding, and me answering him in English, in which he was less than proficient. As I said, I didn't know my father well, partly because he did not speak to his children about his pre-war life and losses. And as I wrote in my book, I picked up information about my parents' pasts by overhearing their conversations with friends, or sometimes by interpreting their behavior with me. Around the age of 12, eavesdropping from my seat on the stairs overlooking our living room, I first learned that my father had a wife and child who perished in the Holocaust. To give you more of a sense of where I was coming from in my relationship with my father when I began to encounter his poetry, I'd like to read some additional paragraphs from the introduction of my book. By the time I entered training to become a psychotherapist, I had developed a rich vocabulary to describe my father. I used adjectives like needy, boastful, judgmental, self-involved, opinionated, and competitive to describe many of his interactions with me and with others. But I also knew him as fun-loving, energetic, brave, forgiving, and most importantly, able to acknowledge wrongdoing. I thought that all of these adjectives explained him. And a few paragraphs later, yet I barely knew the him I thought I had made peace with. All the adjectives I used to characterize my father described only the waves, not the deep underlying currents. I didn't and couldn't know his depths. Almost everything important to me about my father, I learned as a result of this one poem a day practice I began around 5 years ago. And although it started as an exercise, the process of reading and digesting my father's work was life-changing. Because I am a psychotherapist, accustomed to looking for and finding patterns in people's behavior, I noticed themes in Peretz's writing and to some extent organized the book into chapters reflecting those themes. The first chapter, however, followed my discoveries as I read and digested his first book, A Licht für a Groschen, A Candle for a Penny. This was the book of my father's poems and fables that he reconstructed from memory. These were the poems and fables he had written as a young man before and during the war and in its immediate aftermath, and I was hugely curious about who he was and what he was writing at the time. Here I discovered, among other things, my father's first love, the emotional agony of his wartime separation from his home and wife and child, and his reverence for Yung-Vilne Peretz. I devote a chapter to my father's fables. His fables became important to me for a few reasons. One, as a way to further my understanding of Yiddish literary history. I learned through his poetry that Peretz saw himself as a link in the golden chain of Yiddish literature and was devoted to continuing the fable form, this important and unique form of Yiddish literature. The fables also became a way that I discovered more about my father's personalities and passions. I discovered when reading his fables how tied Peretz was still to the natural world surrounding Vilna, the flora and fauna, the animals, domestic and wild, how vivid the characters and implements of the city's markets remained, and how he maintained his connection to his lost world by writing the fables that described his surroundings. And finally, many of his values and pet peeves were expressed in his fables. For example, his dislike of pretension and hypocrisy, his appreciation for deep knowledge acquired through effort and study, and his political critiques, particularly of the Soviet Union. Sheva will read some fables after my presentation in which you can see some of these themes reflected. As I mentioned earlier, my father was invited to join Yung-Vilne as a fabulist. As a fabulist, he participated in the reinvention of this ancient form of literature and adapted it to write about modern concerns. He was inspired by a great Yiddish fabulist named Eliezer Steinberg. In fact, his inspiration to write fables was after hearing them recited by the actor Hertz Grossbard in one of his famous word concerts. My father immediately ran home and wrote his first two fables. He often told the story of how his friend and poet, Shimshon Kahan, also a member of Yung-Vilne and the assistant editor of the Vilner Tag newspaper, once noticed a notebook sticking out of my father's shirt pocket. He grabbed the notebook and ran. The next day, my father was astonished to see two of his fables published in this newspaper. The fable, written in everyday language, typically has two protagonists or antagonists from the natural world, often animals, representing different points of view, and are vehicles for representing the author's moral view. The fable often ends with a pithy moral at the end to make sure the point is driven home. In Canada, my father began to write what I came to call poetic fables, an innovative melding of poetry and fable. I'd like to read you an early fable published in his first book, written in more everyday language, followed by a later one, published 23 years later, in which the language is much more poetic. The early one is entitled Brillen, or Glasses. This is a fable translated by my father initially into English and then edited by Marvin Schiff, the husband of the Yiddish activist Ida Schiff, but himself someone who did not speak Yiddish at all. He conversed with my father about the fable's meaning until he achieved a rhyming English version which satisfied him. Rhyme and rhythm were very important to my father, and especially so in the fable. Brillen, glasses. Father's bought two lovely toys for his twins, two little boys. What a joy, just what they want. Both the boys are jubilant. Frolicking outdoors, behold, the wonders of the world unfold. What a view, cries Elihu. Everything is blue, quite blue. Blue the earth, and blue the sky, even blue the butterfly. But laughing in a manner grim, Berele opposes him. Who says blue? From what I've seen, everything around is green. Green the field, and green the inn. Even you are green, my twin. Father, likely for $1, bought sunglasses of two colors, with blue for Ellie, green for Bear. He sowed the seeds of trouble there. A bitter quarrel is being fought, each son giving what he's got. One says green, the other blue, The fighting wanes, then starts anew. Then, amid the slaps and scratches, each one breaks the other glasses. The fighting stops, the two stand stunned, dazzled by a golden sun. And here is the later fable, Yung-Vilne, Sun, Sea, Wind. By the time he wrote this fable, Peretz was further developing the fable form and making it his own. There were still the two antagonists that are typically there in a fable and a moral, but the moral is implied rather than given in a pithy statement at the end. He was also using poetic language rather than the folksy everyday language that fables were usually written in. Sun, Sea, Wind. The sun unbuttons her nightgown, a cloud, a silver nightgown with crimson buttons, and dips her golden strands into the sea's depths. The sea, turbulent to its black abyss, starts to dazzle with various colors. He still carries the reflection of the sun in his heart, even when the storm wind starts to stir him up. The wind, his old intimate buddy, is also in love with the sun's blondness. He begrudges the sun her blonde shimmer when she bathes in the sea's depths. She loosens her gold blonde locks into the heart of the sea and flirts with him. The sea starts to flame pink in the morning with green emeralds and blue sapphires. The wind becomes a wild tempest with jealousy. He throws himself on the sea with a fearful tempest. He wants to bedeck the naked incandescent sun with gray clouds to cover her body. But the sea does not allow this. He defies the wind. Even though he's a friend, love is stronger. He hurls his waves angrily in this fight and swirls and hits the wind, the interloper, violently. But the wind still flies around on whirling wings. He tears pieces from the sea to discredit the sun. He has already broken the sea into pieces to keep the sun from showing her face there. The sun, hidden, peeks out from a crack and smiles to herself about the whole story. Down there, two foolish males are fighting. They think they are the sun's paramours. Tomorrow, they'll let go of their anger. The sea and wind will stop their noise, and in the rosy early morning, she will come again to wash her golden hair in the sea. I devote a chapter to Chaim Grade, who was my father's best friend. Grade was, of course, also a member of Yung-Vilne, and my father and Grade knew each other well pre-war in Vilna. I wrote this chapter because in reading through my father's books, I found many poems that were written about Grade, both about my father's admiration and love of him and his work, and about Grade's mother Bella and the poverty and difficult circumstances of their lives in Vilna. But my curiosity was initially stimulated by a few poems alluding to a mystery surrounding Chaim Grade's funeral. I knew nothing about this when I began to read my father's poems. I simply encountered a series of poems, 4 in a row, in his last book, Azemel Fundemel, A Song from the Twilight. In his poems, my father lauds Grade's prolific creative gift and honors him for immortalizing Vilna's markets and synagogues and inhabitants, for memorializing the city in its poorest and most exalted places, and for elevating Yiddish in his writing. He expresses his grief about Grade being insufficiently honored and celebrated after his death. He feels personally robbed of the experience of being in his rightful place at Grade's funeral. The two final are more pointed poems that seem to be addressed to the person responsible for denying Grade the funeral ceremony and honors that were his due. I learned from David Roskis that my father was speaking obliquely to Grade's wife Ina, who had kept the details of Grade's funeral a secret from his friends and the Yiddish-speaking community. The experience of reading these poems about Grade led me to visit a New York cemetery so that I could see for myself and stand by Grade's gravesite. I was surprised by what I found. In this chapter are also excerpts from letters sent by Grade to my father. including Grade's struggles to survive as a Yiddish writer in the US with no other source of income, his encouragement of my father to write poems to cope with his grief after the death of my mother, and also words of encouragement about my father's development of his new poetic fable form. One of the most important chapters is entitled Yiddish and is about my father's passion for and devotion to the language. In my father's books, I found numerous love odes to the language and to the Yiddish teachers and poets who inspired him pre- and post-war. The prologue to his first book, A Licht für a Groschen, A Candle for a Penny, is an 8-line poem entitled Mein Lied, My Poem. Chotsch is Ohren mein Lied, wie a Licht für a Groschen, schmelzt sich ones on Tisch von mein Yiddischen Loschen. Nit für Iskor a Shor, nit leponem a Kaddish, nor an Kegen a Bräut und frisch Wasser a Ladish. Although my poem is poor, like a candle for a penny, I take pride in its Yiddish language and its place on the table, not for appearance's sake, not as a memorial candle, but right next to a loaf of bread and a jug of fresh water. I found many poems criticizing the Jewish community that he found here in North America after the war, for its lack of appreciation and or outright mockery of and contempt for the Yiddish language, its ignorance of Yiddish literature, and what he understood as literature's role in uplifting people and teaching spiritual values. He contrasted the richness of Yiddish literature to the materialism and distorted values he found in the Jewish community in North America. My father's mission, his life-sustaining passion, was the continuity of Yiddish literary culture. I did not know this before I started to read his poetry. The chapter on Yiddish includes poems about other writers from my father's 1983 book, Nicht Delzocht, or Incompletely Expressed. This is the book for which my father received the Munger Prize. One of these poems was about Moshe Kulbach, the Yiddish poet, novelist, and dramatist, and my father's teacher during the years that Kulbach was in Vilna. I write about this poem entitled Kulbach, saying that of all the love poems my father I read, this one to his teacher describes the beloved with the most intimate details and burns with the strongest passion. Everything he learned about poetry, he said, he learned from Kulbach. He describes him reverently as a mentor and a teacher, offering encouragement on an individual basis to each of the students who tentatively showed him their writing, teaching each one how to find their own voice. He led the students on field trips in nature, teaching them how to discover poetry from the whisper of the wind, the sprouting of plants, and the rustling of trees in the mountains and the valleys. These are some verses I translated from this poem. Ah, Kulbach, my teacher and intimate idol, who would have believed then that I, the prankster, the brawler, and swimmer, would so completely fall in love with poems and rhymes? Like brilliant stars, his words about lines and melody took hold of me. My fables and poems have him to thank, because everything I draw with his pail. Everything I think is the effect of his dedication. Everything I seek is his tearful destiny, and everything I want and dream I find in his sparkling Yiddish words. A very long poem, longer than any other in my father's lexicon, closes the section about Yiddish writers. It's entitled Das Gessel von 7 Poeten, the Street of 7 Poets. It's an ode to the street where my father lived, where, as he tells it, 6 other poets also lived, some of them well-known and members of literary groups and others not. In the poem, my father takes the reader on a walk through the neighborhood, describing each house as he comes to it. He's still able to intimately picture the road, each house and yard, and his descriptions show the reader both the physical and emotional environments in which these poets lived. The first house he comes to is that of Avram Sutzkever, perhaps the most famous member of Yung-Vilne, the poet and partisan who post-war founded the literary quarterly Die Goldene Kette, the Golden Chain, in Israel. My father tells us that he played chess with Sutzkever's brother, and that his devout mother brought them refreshments with love on her face. The next house was Laser Wolf's, also a member of Yung-Vilne. He wrote in this poem about Laser Wolf's poverty and his bitter anger, which caused him to turn to the false redeemer, the promise of universal justice in the Soviet Union. Hirsch Glick, who wrote the partisan hymn Zog nit kein Mo, also lived on this street right across the road from my father's house. Hirsch Glick was my father's first cousin. The poem describes him reverently as beautiful and beloved. He describes the poverty in Glick's house as clean and concealed. But in this house, he writes, love blooms. His poem describes how Glick went to work at the age of 13 to drive the hardship from his home and brought home a loaf of bread at night like a gift. When the Nazis invaded Vilna, my father and Glick set off together, running fearfully in a desperate attempt to escape. But by the Sheshkiner Bridge, Glick came to a standstill and ran back to his family, unable to abandon them despite his fear. Many poems my father wrote about Yiddish express his grief about the demise of the language. During his lifetime, he witnessed his readership diminishing, as well as Yiddish not being passed on to the generation that followed his. But these poems, often filled with despair, never ended there. He always expressed some hope that Yiddish culture, conveyed through language and literature, would survive. I'd like to read you a few paragraphs ending the chapter entitled In the Shadow of Yesterday, which are poems of mourning and grief, to illustrate this. My father had once lived with a sense of purpose, shoulder to shoulder with other young writers, developing new forms of writing, breaking with the traditions of their parents, seeking to create a new world, writing the hymns that would inspire their people to see beauty within and without, and to fight for justice. But for whom is he writing after experiencing such losses? He asks himself this question often. He answers, finding his wisdom as he often did, in nature. It is for the lilac that sleeps in the winter when the earth is frozen and wakes up in the spring to the great reckoning. One can already see the wisps of grass in the garden beds, the airs of faded songs. So what if I am already too old and it is already late and the noisy street does not hear me? In the spring, a fresh poet will sprout again from my old songs. Then my name will be young again and will be renewed in the others' poems. And like old wine, a good drink, my poems will be toasted with l'chaim. In addition to the chapters on Yiddish, Chaim Grade, Fables, and In the Shadow of Yesterday, there's a chapter entitled Creation, in which I write about the discovery of my father's spirituality tied to his experience of creative inspiration and his belief system. There's a chapter entitled Family, in which I write about discovering details about family members my father had never spoken of before. Green Words covers his nature poetry, and the last chapter is entitled Song of Songs. This covers poems about my mother after her death and the poems my father wrote when he was courting his third wife, Saba Fried. He was in his early 60s at the time and insecure about their age difference. I include a poem Peretz wrote in which he describes being annoyed because Saba couldn't intuit his needs and teased him in a moment of vulnerability. The poem helped me understand my father's sensitivity and the way he responded when he felt hurt. I chose the poems and fables that ended up in the book, both because they moved me and because I learned something from them about my father emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually. I was deeply affected by some, and that led me to reflect about an aspect of intergenerational trauma, which is also reflected in this book. My book is driven by my father's poetry because that's how I was led to him. But it's not a book of poetry translation. It's a melding of biography, memoir, psychology, and Yiddish literary history. It is also a very personal recounting of my changed relationship with my father as a result of reading his poetry. In the afterword of my book, I enumerate some of the things I learned from reading my father's poetry and fables. I'd like to conclude here by reading some of them. I learned from my father how important it is to have a dream, how a mission, no matter how tragic and impossible, can keep one alive. I learned about the unique artistic and spiritual beauty of Vilna. I learned about my father's literary peers and mentors. I learned about the sustaining power of a righteous cause. Most importantly, I learned about my father himself. In bearing his own soul, he helped to make mine more whole. Thank you for this opportunity to honor my father. Sheva is now going to read some of my father's fables in Yiddish.
But before Sheva does this, Tyra Hannah, it was so moving, beautiful, enlightening. I really can't thank you enough. You opened like an extra Vilna world for me and other people who came to listen to your beautiful presentation.
Thank you.
Tyra Sheva,
Yeah.
open that microphone.
Okay. Anna, did you want to say a word about the first poem, or should I just go right into it?
Go right into it, and maybe I will say something about it when you're
Done. Okay.
When you're done, yeah.
Okay. So the first poem is called Psamim. And is that going to be shown in English?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Psamim. In a Stelchel auf den Häufel. Ja?
It's
Okay. Me ken heren? Okay. Ich heb an der In a Stelchel auf den Häufel, wo es sammeln sich zu neuf Sachen kollerlei a Säufel auf zu reinigendem Häuf. Hat euch wer a volle Kastel Mist gebracht von Ergetswu? Gucken alle auf den Gastel und mir halt die Näser zu. Emmes reden redt nicht keiner, nur me krimmt sich und me winkt. Und das Kastel, das nicht reine, wie sie meint man nicht, sie stinkt. Helft sei Gott, der Rammer Itzel kommt herein in a Missles, tut was von a Flasche a Spritzel und von Mist net schmecken Bels. Quält das Riedel, a Balmäufes ist der Itzel, a Balness. Willer schmeckt bei ihm Tinoifes mit'n Wohlgeruch von Bels. Nor der Besem is beruhiges, hat Verdruss und rett mit Gall. Sagt mir, fragt er, zu was Teuges, Psamim dick zu machen kahl? Ich verstehe a guter Rammer, wird nicht spritzen glatt siehst. Darf ausrahmen dem Kammer und rauswerfen das Mist. Euch bei uns in Leben krummen, trefft dasselbe auf der Welt. Mist verdeckt man mit Parfümen und der Eulem schmeckt und fällt.
Oh, this fable was translated by Marvin Schiff, the husband of Yiddish activist Edith Schiff. The message here, that is the garbage of those in power, which is covered up by the sweet perfume of lies, was repeated in many of my father's fables, starting when he lived under the fascist Polish government and later following his experiences in the Soviet Union.
Okay, next one.
Yeah.
A Vulkan. In der Früh in a Tuman steht beim Jambreg a Vulkan. Auf sein karg grinter Ganeden, Bämer stehen weiß zerbliet, nur in seine Ingeweden bräust der Genem, reut, zerglied. Geh weiß, was es tut sich dorten, zu heiß ist es ausgefinnen, nur von Mäulseins die Bajorte tut allein die Süßkeit rinnen. Seht nur, wie die Welt ist schön, a zergrinte, a zerblite, seht, wie's wiegen sich in Chein, Karschenseder eingehiete, grün der Jam, der Himmel bläu, alles ist ruhig und verschieden. Konnte nicht der Mensch so leben euch und sein zufrieden? Nicht vergessen Blut und steht nicht da weglassen in Räuchen, schwimmt a Wolkendl in Heuchen und sie weint sich schön gerät, darschend Chaverschaft und a Have und vergisst a Welt mit Lave.
Similar theme as Samim, also translated by Marvin Schiff. Although it can certainly apply to other countries and leaders, I'm sure its origin lies in his experience of betrayal when he encountered the Soviet Union personally during the war and learned more about its repression and violence afterwards.
Okay. Pave und Indik. Geht a Pave in Häuf und verreißt dem Äckerräuf, stolz mit ihre Federn, ausgeputzt in Grins und Bläus, halt sich a Säumin Gräus und seht nicht jederen. Geht an Indik mit ihr mit, messt jachsonestig die Tritt, bloß sein Reuten Geuderon, schockelt gadlestig dem Kopf, tritt uns ab dem Weg, tritt ab. Es geht der Prinz von Pleuderen. Gucken alle noch die zwei mit a Schmeichel und mit Weh. Ausgeputzte Teckelach, Eckengröße haben sie, mit Kollieren allerlei, aber Kerb, zwei Breckelach.
Also translated by Marvin Schiff, and this one put to music actually by David Wall in Toronto.
Ah,
My father wrote lots of fables reflecting this theme, that of self-aggrandizement or unearned social status, be it by wealth or position in society. In my father's view, reflected in his fables, true stature had to be earned by hard work, years of study, deep knowledge, and humility.
just a question. I know the book from which these are taken has are all of these illustrations from the book or not all of them?
The illustrations on your...
That we're seeing, yeah.
No, they're not from the book.
They're not from the book. Okay. Okay.
Kolya can say more about that.
Yes, this is from our co-worker Natalia Kobzamark, and she's really, as you all can see, so artistic, and we all enjoy double the beautiful fables, translations, and also artwork.
Well, she actually drew them?
I don't know. I mean,
okay, but it's beautiful. Yeah.
Naya technology.
Yeah, Naya technology. Anyway, the illustrations in the book are also lovely.
Yeah.
A flatteral. 1 second. It's just.
Yeah, Borach.
Okay, a flatteral.
Wait a second.
Okay.
We have it's.
Okay. Flita flatteral af lonkes blumike, gucken noch es blimelach aromike, herzlach flattern und blättlach zittern, mit a wemmens Nektar wird heint sich fittern. A luftiker, a zen choleriker, a poet mistam, a diener lyriker, weiß allein nicht, in sein flatterprachtigen, a verwellicher Blum, wird heint nächtigen. Der a Schmeichel und a Glätt a Seitigen, der a Kusch und der a Wort zweideitigen. Und derweil Cholille nicht verspätigt sich, I mit Honigsüßen angesättigt sich. I gewiegt sich auf kollierte Wiegelach. Und die Blimelach, umschuldige Ziegelach, mit Herzelach, reute Kraterlach und Lippelach, Honigkriegelach, weißen Nebach nicht, als Flatterlach, seinen Wärmlach, mit zugefarbter Fliegelach.
This fable was translated by Hindi Abelson. I love the metaphor of butterflies being worms with painted wings. It reflects a similar theme as Smomim and Vulkan of the outside of something as compared to the inside. And in this case, the outside can be gaudy or beautiful, but it's what's inside that counts.
Yeah. Okay. The next one is really fun. I like this one. It's called Reklames. Grinta Kibbutz Lem Kineret, welcher spiegelt sich in Sonn, schwimmt a Katschke in Scheret, wärmt sich in Samt a Hund. Und dem Schmus zwischen beiden trockt a stiller Windel Na mir Herrn, was sie reden. Red die Katschke, ich bett dich sehr, liebe Hindel, tu der Klär, was die chinerische Ehr seinen also populär. Jede Mame tut sie kaufen, in jedem Land, prägelt sie auf jeder Eufen. Meine nimmt man nicht in Hand. Hat sie seinen Punkt wie deine, mit a Weißel und a Gelchel, hat sich leg sie aus, der Heine, affen Hei in selben Stellachel. Punkt wie deine, seinen meine, und noch größer is mein Ei, leg ich aus vor dir mein Teine, vor was kauft nicht keiner sei. Schmeichelt hin der Jentel, und sie fragt a sei, was tust du, Entel, der legst dein Ei? Was tu ich? Ich setz mich auf a Bintel Hei, ich setz mich und ich quetsch mich, bis ich leg ein Ei. Und was tust du nach dem? Tut die Huna frag, stell sich und ich geh sich, stiller red weg. Entele Kasocke mit'n Besennos, lacht die gelle Quocke, schweigst und fragst vor was? Ich, als ich darf mich legen, setz ich sich nicht feul. Ich vermach die Augen, öffn auf das Mäul. Kaka, 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 mach ich a Geschrei. Ich, die gelle Quocke, legen geh an Ei. Nach dem Schein a Milde, als ich heb sich auf, mach ich a Gepilder auf den ganzen Häuf. Kaka, alle Mames Herren mein Geschrei, als ich mach Reklames, kaufen sie mein Ei.
I write an anecdote about this fable in my book. My sister Libby translated this fable when she was quite young. I think it's a great translation as it captures the playfulness and humor of the original in Yiddish.
Okay.
And what a beautiful reading, Sheva. Yasher koech.
Yeah.
Das ist es, ja?
Yeah.
Ja, Fragen?
So
Und
no, it's dear friend. We have a beautiful, beautiful event. Still coming, still going. You still have time to ask a question if you want. But I want to read one note from the chat. Dear Anna, your father was a close friend of my mother, Yentl Rubin Fishman from Vilna, and was often a visitor at our home together with your Aunt Etke, whom we loved dearly. Kulbak was also other teacher in Vilna. Looking forward to acquiring and reading your book. Warmly and best wishes, Anna Fishman Gonscher. A hartstikken Dank, Hannah. and I'm sure that you are not the only one who is looking forward to acquiring and reading the book. And Baruch, I think, already sent a reference where you can get this book. And if you didn't, Baruch, sei so good. So the link is coming. And it was on this personal note from Anna Gonchar. We want to give you a taste of Peretz Miransky speaking Yiddish. Speaking Yiddish about Moshe Kuhlberg and Eliezer Steinberg, who greatly influenced his poetry and his love for Yiddish. This is from Peretz Miransky's speech at Jewish Public Library in Montreal at the event honoring his new publication, a book of poetry, Shures Shire.
Bei mir sich zu gehen in die Fußtritt von meinen zwei Lehrers, was haben mir gelernt in meiner Jungschaft. Und lernen mir noch ad hayom, wie sie zu schreiben und wie sie zu filmen. Einer von sie ist gewesen der größere Poet und Prosaiker Moshe Kuhlberg, der jung umgebrachte Korben von der sowjetischen Unmenschlichkeit. Moshe Kuhlberg, der beliebteste Literaturlehrer von jüdischen Lehrerseminaren und die Gymnasies in Vilne, ist gewesen der Wegweiser Rebbe und Chava von allen Yung-Vilnanern. Hat gehabt auf mir einen gewaltigen Einfluss. Hat der Erste von mir entpflegt die Herrlichkeit von der Natur und die Brüche von der Erde. Meine Personifikation von Bäumen und Blumen, sein Verdienst, hat es mir gelernt und lernt es mir noch heutzutage. Mein zweiter, späterer Lehrer gewesen Eliezer Steinberg. Bei ihm habe ich viele nie gewusst, bis ihm habe ich viele nie gewusst, das Moscheldicke, was drämmelt in mir. Bis ich habe nicht der Herz Großbarten Lehen und Steinbergs Mischolem, ist mir viele nicht eingefallen, als ich konnte schreiben Mischolem. Und nicht nur Mischolem habe ich bei Steinberg gelernt. Hat mich auch gelernt, Yiddish Loschen. Das Wortspiel bei mir, der jiddisch-hebräische Gramm, das ist sein Verdienst. Die Schönheit von Yiddish, die Beugewdigkeit von Mame-Loschen, was kein anderer Loschen auf der Welt vermogt es nicht, macht den Poet singendig. Und dafür singe ich also viel und schwach für meine Sprache. Ich bin verliebt in Yiddish. Es ist, als die Beugewdigkeit von der Sprache macht leichter für einen Poet zu gewinnen, die Musik von Loschen. Aber der poetische Umruh im Poet lässt ihm nicht nehmen die fertige Sprache in sein Meisterzimmer und ihr benutzen sie, wie sie ist. Seine Ahnungen seien allemal reicher von seinen Loschen, seine Vision seien farbiger wie Wörter. Und es zwingt ihn damit zu suchen, bessere Ausdrücken, schönere Wortchidushim, neuere Imagen. Aber keinmal ist nicht zufrieden. Ein poetischer Ausguss ist wie ein Glas mit Smetane. Erledigt es aus und das Beste bleibt auf die Wendlach von Herz. Dafür ist der Drang, wieder zu schreiben und zu suchen, einen Weg zu sorgen, das Niedersagte. Ja, danke.
Ja, dank Peretz Miransky. It's like a so schön und so passig. It's so fitting, so appropriate to hear these beautiful words. And I want to express my gratitude to a co-worker, Yasha Geiner, who did this beautiful translation and put it together. We don't have many questions, which is actually maybe people are overwhelmed because I can just bring two quotes, a most moving as well as illuminating presentation. Bravo, Anna. And a wonderful program. And I see another from your probably relative, because says Papa would be proud, Remy. So great. So we want then to give you a little bit more of Peretz Miransky, and Sheva will read two beautiful poems written by him.
Okay,
Bo-
Anna,
uh,
I
yeah,
think we're doing this bilingually, right?
yes, and Borek is going to put them on screen. Let's do it first. Yes,
Okay.
it's coming.
I see the questions are coming, but let's read these, and I have my own question after, if
Okay, of
after other
course, yeah.
people.
We have a little time, yes.
Okay, this poem I just find so lovely. Not that you want my editorial comments, but I'm giving them. Okay. And notice that it's 1938. Stiller. Stiller, Triller, Soloway, alle Welten schlafen. Bloß a dimmentener Sprei, sternt in onsoffen. Bloß a wacher, lacher Qual murmelt was dem Gegend. Und a grüner Sternfall regnet, regnet, regnet. Oh, no English? Or are you doing it in English, Anna?
I can read it in English,
Yeah.
yes. Quietly trills a nightingale. All the world is dreaming. There's just a diamond spray of light, a starry vastness gleaming. There's just a softly laughing brook murmuring to the meadows, and a silver shower of stars is raining, raining, raining. I did the translation. I wished I could have made the last 3 lines rhyme, but I couldn't. But the thing that touches me most about this poem is that he wrote it when he was so young in 1938. This is before the war in Vilna, and I just can imagine him looking out the window at a starry night and feeling it. Yeah.
Okay. The next one is rainbows, Regenbogens. Okay. Die Sung sagt mit goldene Sägen die Käpp und die Chmares herab. Es schimmert a goldener Regen, was tut meine Werte an Trop. A Nigen, a seltener Nigen, zersinkt sich in mir wie a Fleit. Uns hebt dann das Herz meint sich wiegen auf lichtige Strunes von Freud. Ich geh a verklärter, verhärter, uns klingen bei mir im Gemüt zerglimmerte jiddische Wörter und stellen sich aus in a Lied. Nur kleiner wär ich in Alleinkeit, es zankt wie a Lichtel, mein Freud, a poschete Schönheit und schwer zu verteitschen mit Red. Ich geh a verträrter, verhärter, in goldig zerregneten Spree. Ich such bei die Tropfenlach Wörter, uns fällen mir Wörter vor sie.
The sun slices off the tops of dark clouds with a golden saw. A golden rain shimmers, accompanying my steps. A melody, a rare melody, sings within me like a flute, and my heart begins to sway with joy upon illuminated musical strings. I walk, musing, a listener, and in my depths, sparkling Yiddish words ring out and lay themselves out in a poem. My loneliness ebbs, my joy flickers like a candle. Such simple beauty is hard to translate into words. I walk teary-eyed, a detective in the golden spray of the rain. I am looking for words for the raindrops, and they do not reveal their names. So 2 things. These poems about creation, the creative impulse, inspiration are some of my favorite poems, and there's an entire chapter devoted to them. But also, here it is, exactly what he says in the piece that we heard a few minutes ago, where he's speaking about how the poet tries to express what can't be expressed, can never be fully expressed. he's looking for words for the raindrops, and they do not reveal their names.
But if I can just say something, can we see the beginning of the poem again?
Of course.
Yeah, this is something that didn't make it into the English, but this line here, was tut meine Wärter on trop. So I think he's referring to Torah trop, which is, the way that the Torah is chanted. So he's linking his creative impulse somehow to the desire to create something holy. And you talk a lot in your book about his background and which is intensely Jewish. So I just thought that was a beautiful line.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes. Dear friends, so we exhausted our program, but there is one question: was the Yiddish not spoken at your home?
My father and mother spoke Yiddish between them. I spoke English to my mother, and she answered me in English. She came from a very different background than my father. She was quite comfortable in English. My father taught her Yiddish. So I heard Yiddish in my home a lot because my father's friends spoke Yiddish. But I stopped speaking it myself and answered in English once I started to attend public school.
So also, going along with just what you said, there is a comment so touching that the father did not have the language to ignite the feeling of his daughter when she was young and fully and deeply as the world of nature and ideas touched him, and that she has brought him to life for herself and readers now. And this is so, I think, beautiful and fitting. And Sheva wanted to ask a question. With this, we'll probably end our presentation. Yes, Sheva.
Okay, I'm not smart enough to write it in the chat, or maybe panelists aren't supposed to. So you, at the beginning, Anna, you gave a number of adjectives, both positive and negative, about your father, what you felt. I think that was before you embarked on this.
Yeah.
Now that you know him from his poetry, what would you add? What would you take away?
Well, I would only say, we can all make judgments based on little pieces of information here and there, and many of us do that, but it takes real intimacy and communication to really know the depths of another human being. And I am just so grateful that my father left a record of who he was.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Yes. Hartstigen Dank, Anna, Hannah, Sheva. Baruch is a magician. He really puts all our presentation, big concepts and progress together. Baruch Bloom, what you see or you don't see, the Workers' Circle, is our unbelievably talented person and co-worker and friend. And again, huge thanks to Natalia Kobzamak, who did these beautiful arrangements for poems, not to be read, but also to enjoy greatly. We hope to see you at our upcoming events. Two are coming very shortly, both the Holocaust Remembrance Day, January 27th, same time, 1 p.m., and Winter in Yiddishland, February 1, the entire day. And hope to see you there. Bleibt alle gesund.
There's one more question, but
yeah.
okay.
Yes.
It's in the chat if you want to see it.
From
Blime.
Can you read it?
Chaim Grade.
Yeah. Why were you surprised when you viewed Chaim Grade's gravesite?
That's a really good question. It was because I was led to believe that it would be decrepit and not taken care of. And instead, what I saw was a beautiful I write about this in the book, a beautiful memorial stone, which was a poem about Vilna. And it's a poem that wonders who will memorialize Vilna when he is gone, who will remember it, who will remember it with the awe and the fondness that and appreciation that he does. And it's a beautiful poem, and I knew that my father felt the same way. I was just very glad to see it. And it's easy to make judgments again about people when you have very little information about them, but his wife, whatever she did or didn't do, memorialized Chaim Grade beautifully there. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hartlichen Dank. Bleibt alle gesund.